Welcome to Off the Clock, the webcast of employment attorneys at Miller Johnson, where we discuss what is happening in the HR world and provide practical insight and advice. We are your co-hosts, Rebecca Strauss and Sarah Willey, two employment lawyers who spend their days guiding employers through all of the challenges that workplaces offer. I'm excited to talk about this thing that we promised at the end of our last episode.
Yes.
The virtual, what I've named the fluid workplace.
Yes, I love that. And so that everyone understands what you mean, because we've talked about, so you and I know what you mean. We had an episode early on, and frankly, everyone was talking about, right, earlier on with COVID, this dynamic where some people were going to be in the office and some people were going to be remote, a term I still don't love, by the way, that term remote, but that's what we've all decided as a society we're going to call it. And it was kind of like an either or, right? If you're going to have remote employees, this is what you need to do, blah, blah, blah. But what we found is that the term fluid is much more accurate because the same employee might be both at home and in the office, just depending on the day.
Yes,
right?
Right. And to be clear, of course, we're talking primarily about employees who are maybe office employees, right? Their day-to-day job responsibilities don't necessarily require their in-person presence. So they're not working on a manufacturing floor, taking care of patients or something like that. Exactly. Correct. Yeah. I mean, truly what I've seen is employers view this as one or the other. Our employees are either in person or they're working remotely. And so many employers set these dates when everyone was going to come back to work.
Remember those?
Remember those? And they kept setting dates, and then that date would come, and we'd be in the middle of a surge, and then they would push the date out.
Right.
And oh my goodness, for so many workplaces now, I have just seen them land in this place of kind of uncertainty a little bit. There's people are still employees have never officially been called back into work on a full-time basis, but workplaces are open so employees can come in if they choose, but many are choosing not to unless they want to. Right. And so and they largely have given up on the idea of having an official date in which everyone's coming back to work. Okay.
And what I have found is that employers who did want folks to come back then had to deal with all the requests not to. And when they were too rigid, the rules were rigid, HR folks would start calling us and say, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Yeah. And people got very tired of that. So a lot of supervisors wanted to say, look, if you want to work at home, work at home.
Work at home if you can and want to, that's fine. Right. So, and by the way, I think this is all okay. Right?
Well, sure.
And quite frankly, I think for many businesses, giving employees some freedom to decide whether to work in the office on a particular day or work from home on a particular day can even be a competitive advantage. I think it's okay. I will also add, though, that it's driving many HR folks crazy. It's making them very uncomfortable, right?
Yes, we're giggling because we've both been on lots of those calls, right?
I don't know what the rules are, right?
We like our rules, right? And so we're going to get to some things that every HR person should really think about when it comes to the fluid workplace and people kind of coming and going. But I think the number one question that we get, or maybe we don't get, but that makes folks uncomfortable about this scenario is who gets to decide? Who gets to decide whether Sarah can work from home every day or whether she has to be in the office every day or whether it can be a combination? And if it is a combination on any given day, is it Sarah that decides whether she's at home that day or in the office? Is it the supervisor? Is it HR? Is it the CEO who wants to set a certain culture for the entire organization?
Right.
What do you think about that?
I think yes to all of it.
But I can't rememy everything I just said.
Right. So
yes to what?
I do, and that's such a great question. I, in a perfect world, I would love to see this decision making being perhaps more deliberate than it is being made right now. So yes, an executive leader, whether it be the CEO, whether it be the chief human resources officer, whoever that person is who has that authority, that person should be the one deciding the general framework of what's okay, right? In other words, every business can decide, number one, we want everybody in person, or instead, we're not going to have offices anymore and everyone's going to work remotely. That's okay too. Or now we understand there's really a third option, which seems to be the most common right now, which is some sort of hybrid, the fluid workplace. But there should be somebody at a high level saying, yes, this is acceptable at the very least. And then the day-to-day decisions about where a particular human being is then gets made at the lower levels. My experience is that the direct leader is the one that best knows what that person needs to be doing on that day, and should generally have the authority to say, you need to be in the workplace on this particular day, or you don't need to be in the workplace on this particular day.
And it can vary employee by employee, right? There may be some employees that have the exact same job responsibilities, but one functions much better independently, without direct supervision, right? And another really does much better when they're in a workplace with others around with direct supervision, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
It is very much okay. Although, of course, whenever we think about each individual supervisor being able to decide for themselves who is going to be allowed to work where, it makes me a little uncomfortable, I'll be honest with you, right? So I would add to that, HR then should be setting the general expectations of how those decisions should be made and providing some sort of training and guidance to those leaders. Right? So there's general organizational expectations, and then we train leaders, supervisors, whoever it is who are making those day-to-day decisions as to how to make those and make sure that you're consistent in the way you're doing that.
Yes, exactly. And one of those expectations should be, one of the considerations should be, is the employee on a day-to-day basis going to get to decide where they perform?
Which is happening largely now. I mean,
it's happening with me.
Yes. Right.
And with you. And for folks in similar types of positions, we look at our calendar the next day and we decide where is the best place, right, for me to do this work. And can I take that upon myself to decide, or do I need my supervisor's approval? Are there going to be certain days, for instance, that we're all going to be in the office together? Like no matter what.
Oh, such a good point.
On Wednesdays, right? Everyone on the team is going to be here. And then the rest of the days you can choose for yourself. Or maybe each day you can choose for yourself, or maybe no days you can choose for yourself. But I have found that most employees prefer a hybrid or a fluid work environment.
Sure, everybody loves it. Absolutely.
Yes. If you poll folks, it's not that most people want to work remotely, which is what a lot of hyperbole out there says. It's not really true. Some people do, of course, but most people don't want 100% remote. And most people also don't want 100% in the office, right? They want to have some control over their lives and some flexibility. So that can be great for retaining people, to offer, if you can swing it, to offer that types of flexibility, right, for employees.
You just said a word that just hit home, and that's control, right? That's what people really love, is being given the authority to have that control in their lives. When many people think of their jobs, right, it doesn't necessarily come with this sense of, I get to decide where I am and what I'm doing every day, right? And so if you can just give folks a little bit of control in that way, it can really give you a competitive advantage, in my opinion. So, but yes, in different businesses are going to have to think through a number of different things. I mean, I've talked to clients who really need to know who is going to be in the workplace for security reasons, for example, right? And so they are accepting of the concept of maybe having a fluid workplace, except they do need to have a framework in place to understand when somebody is going to choose to be at work.
So for employers who are okay with the concept of a fluid workplace, some people in, some people out, the same person in and out
Right.
throughout the week, what do they need to do? How can HR help to make sure there's at least a little bit of structure here?
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And that we're going to make this as smooth as possible.
Right. So we mentioned the first one, which is we really have to engage with and provide some training for our supervisors, our direct leaders, to help them make those day-to-day decisions in an appropriate and consistent way. And that should include what factors are okay for them to consider, right? It could be what that person has to do that day. Does it require them to be in person? Does it not? It could be, as you mentioned, their job performance, things like that. Okay, so that's my first suggestion in that way. I think I have to add something that we've probably talked about several times now, right? Which is organizations, and particularly HR, need to know where somebody is working.
Oh boy.
Right? And you know where I'm going with this because I'm like a drumbeat on this.
I'm all in on it, Sarah.
But
all in.
Fluid workplaces invite people who maybe work in Michigan in February to work in Arizona for several weeks or a month.
Yes, please.
Right.
Whenever I hear about employees doing that, I'm like, why am I not doing that? Why am I still here? And when you introduce the concept of a fluid workplace, this is probably because I defrosted my freezer over the weekend. But the image I have is largely before COVID, we were blocks of ice in one place.
Yes, it was one or the other.
You're right. We unplugged the freezer. The ice is melting. And there's drip, drip, drips. And this is a true story. Some of those drips are on my kitchen floor. They're still in Michigan. But some of them went through the floor into the basement without me knowing it for 12 hours.
Dear.
So if we think of those employees as the ones anywhere, and we now, when we start any counseling call, really about just about anything, wage and hour issues, separation agreement issues, etc., we always have to ask, where is that employee working? We used to just know if our clients had facilities here, right? We would assume they were here. Now those little drips, right? And how often have you gotten the answer, I don't know where all of my employees are today.
There's
I don't know what state they're in.
There's usually a pause in which the
Yes.
person says, and then they sort of pause and say, well, I'm not really quite sure what state they're in. So
I'm not sure where the water dripped to.
Yes.
So the first step is to know where your employees are. And that sounds so, I know that sounds silly and we're laughing about it, but folks listening to us know that's not silly at all.
Exactly. And to be clear, it's important. It's important actually for legal reasons, right?
Yes.
And that is because when businesses have employees working in different states, it triggers tax consequences. Every state has a different threshold for what a business presence is in that state, okay? And I've had enough conversations with our tax colleague, Mark Rysick, who's fantastic about this, to know there are states in which somebody working in their own Airbnb for several weeks or a few months could create a business presence in that state and trigger things that need to be done that Mark understands. And that's when I check out and tell clients they need to talk to Mark Rysick. But then from an employment law standpoint, okay, when employees are working in other states, it can trigger employers to have to comply with the employment laws of that state, okay? Less of a problem if somebody's in Tennessee for the winter, right? Because There are not strict, overbroad employment laws necessarily in Tennessee, but you have somebody who goes to states like California or New York or Massachusetts or increasingly even Illinois.
Yes. And the city of Chicago in particular.
The city of Chicago in particular can trigger significant concerns, requirements for certain notices and policies to be in place.
Different paid leave options.
You don't want to be caught off guard or behind the eight ball with regard to that. Okay, right. So fluid workplace can be an opportunity, right? Can give you a competitive advantage, but you've got to have a framework in place in which you're sure that employees are telling you where they are actually performing the work.
Right.
If it's not where you think it is,
right?
Which is like their primary residence, for example.
Right. Good point. Okay, so the national employment issue now for folks that didn't realize they had facilities in other states other than Michigan, now that they do, the fact that that is so common actually caused us to create a whole national employment law center here, right? Where we actually help employees efficiently deal with the fact that there are one-offs, two-offs in various other states. How do you handle a handbook, right, in that situation? How do you deal with termination decisions, requests for paid leave, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah,
so
right.
that is a huge issue.
Right. Just succinctly, we have a lawyer at Miller Johnson who specializes in all of the 50 states. Not one lawyer, right? But
that's remarkable.
I didn't say that well. For every single state that we have in this country, there is a lawyer at Miller Johnson who is an expert in the law of that state.
Right.
And has at their fingertips resources that can be helpful to clients. So we are set on that.
So step one with the fluid workplace, know where your fluid is.
That's step two. Step one is figure out who's making the decision, right, and train your leaders. Step two is know where your fluid is. I love that.
Know where your drops of water drip to.
Yes.
Step three is once you've decided those things and you know where it is, how are we going to manage? How are we going to evaluate?
Oh, God, it's such a good, right. And when you say that, really what comes to mind first for me is job performance. Over the last few years, I have seen such a struggle with trying to evaluate and manage job performance, largely because for office-based employees, they're not interacting with their direct supervisor face-to-face on a daily basis.
Right. Okay. The supervisor does not see with her own eyes what that employee is doing.
Correct.
So,
and so the old model, which, as you know, I never really liked anyway, but the old model of the annual performance review, right? We're going to wait until the end of a 12-month period in order to sit down and talk to an employee about how they're doing and whether their job performance is acceptable, whether they're performing all of their job functions, what needs to be improved, etc. The idea of waiting 12 months to do that simply is unworkable in a fluid workplace. It just can't happen, in my opinion. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree. First of all, because as I mentioned, in the pre-COVID times, when more people were in the office together, supervisors had a general sense of what someone was doing and how they were doing it and how hard they were working, et cetera.
And they had that day-to-day interaction too, right? Do this report differently, for example.
And employees had a better understanding of what the expectations were too, right?
Yeah.
They could tell by their boss's body language or the way others reacted to them, et cetera, whether things were going well, whether they were not, et cetera, et cetera. With people just in between and all over the place, it's harder for the supervisor to know what's happening, which leads to sometimes a lack of trust. And the way we cure that is through communication. But it also impacts the employee and whether they know how they're doing, right? And the supervisor may assume the employee knows, but they really don't know because there's not these cues. There's not these cues that we pick up in the office more often. So more frequent communication on both sides can solve a lot of problems, a lot of problems. And what if in the course of performance management, a supervisor realizes, I agreed to let this person kind of come and go as they please, but I don't think it's working out as well as I thought it would. What do they do? Do they have any options, or are they stuck
right?
with the approval they originally gave to this arrangement?
Right. Well, assuming this is a workplace in which it is an option to simply require that person to come into work more or even all of the time, in my view, that's a great option, right?
Yep.
To have that day-to-day oversight. Now, that of course is assuming the supervisors there are going to be there every day too, right?
We have supervisors who don't like to be in the office much themselves.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, job performance and confidence in an employee's ability to successfully perform their job remotely is certainly a factor that can and really should be considered when we're talking about where somebody can be asked to work on a daily basis.
Yeah,
right?
I think whenever you're asking someone who has been out of the office more to be in the office more, personally, I think lots of notice really helps smooth that over, right? Because people need to adjust their lives, perhaps with pet care, child care, transportation needs, whatever it is. So I would not expect someone the next week to start coming in more
Every
often.
day, right.
But with lots of notice, that can be good. I also find structured cues can really be helpful in a fluid world. What do you think? Because we're not bumping into each other as much
I think
anymore.
that's right. I think, and that goes to, to me, that falls in the very broad category of job performance, right? How are we making sure that our jobs are getting done, that these things are getting done every day, that our customers are being served, for example, that the reports are being generated. I think it is going to completely reset the way leaders and employees that report to those leaders engage and communicate with each other, right? Again, rather than waiting to talk about what you're doing or not doing for maybe 12 months, that really should be on a regular rhythm, if not daily, certainly weekly, and maybe more often than that, with set times.
Right. And not email check-ins.
No.
I've seen lots of that.
Yeah.
But if we're going to really communicate, build trust, that goes both ways, and really understand what the problems are and what the successes are, right, we need to talk to each other.
Yep, that's good.
Right,
That's
and
really
I
good.
think that lack of engagement, that lack of actual conversation is also what's leading people to resign and change jobs, et cetera. They just don't feel a connection with their coworkers or supervisors.
We seem to be generating a theme here, which is really to have this fluid workplace work and be successful, we're going to have some leadership training.
Yeah. Intentionality is one of my favorite words of 2022. And if we're going to a fluid workplace, we have to just be very intentional about it, right? What about being in the office is good? What about being all together is good? And how can we recreate that when folks are in and out, right? And we're not going to give up on what is good about being in the workplace, but we're going to think about it and not just simply say, okay, Sarah, you can just work from Arizona. Sure. Right? Without replacing any of the collaboration, the communication, the trust building, all of those things. That made sense. That is why some people like being in the office more.
That's an excellent point. Okay, so for those employers, right, who had thought maybe a year ago there were two options: people are either in person or they're remote, and had maybe developed some remote work policies in place for employees that would be designated as remote workers. Remember those times when we so naively thought it would be black and white?
You are a remote worker and you are an in-person
exactly.
worker. Yes.
we had an episode in which we spoke quite a bit about what should be in a remote work policy.
Yep.
It's episode 4 for those, right?
How do you remember that?
And a good reminder that we have all of these episodes are available on any podcast app.
Right.
Okay, so
Yep.
everybody listening today should definitely go back and listen to episode 4. And here's why, right? Businesses now may be, instead of having a remote work policy, they're going to be putting together something like a fluid workplace policy. With
Yep.
any luck, they'll come up with a better term than fluid, because the more I say it, the more I really don't like it.
Now you're just thinking about the dripping ice out of my freezer.
It's your fault. It's your
Before I
fault.
said that,
You
we
turned
were
it
fine
into
with
a
it.
noun rather than an adjective. Anyway, all of those things that we had talked about that are important for a remote work policy should probably be considerations for a fluid workplace policy, right?
Right, but with a little change, right? Because
Yes.
the remote work policies were for employees who were
We're
marked
only remote.
So now we have to have policies that say, when you are not working in the office,
Exactly.
these are the expectations, these are the things that have to happen.
We still need to
Right?
set those expectations. That's right. I
Yes.
think that's very right. Okay, so should we just give a little bit of a reminder to our audience as to what are the types of things that should be included in a policy like that?
Yes. Okay, but again, contrary to the policy went over in episode 4, now we've got to rephrase things in the policy, right?
Right, that's
you may
right.
sometimes be in person, you may sometimes not be in person. When you are not in person, these are the things we need to keep in mind.
That's right. That's right.
Let's talk about one of my favorites, continues to be one of my favorites, rules for video conferencing, right?
Yes, right.
Still running into questions about that. Camera, should your camera be on? Should your camera be off? Where should you be? Should you be in a private place, for instance, where we can maintain confidentiality? Distractions, are private chats okay? During video conferences, it's kind of like whispering in class.
Right.
A little bit, right? It can be distracting, right? I've run into quite a bit of that. People choose to record? Came up on that a few times
Yes.
recently, right? So that's my favorite. The rules about the video conferencing when you are not at a meeting in person. What's one of the other things you would like to see in a policy?
Working hours, recording time,
Yep.
right? If it's a non-exempt employee and they are not working in person in the office, we continue to see lots and lots and lots of concerns about, number one, when they're working, right? And number two, people working outside of their established work hours, and then employers having to pay them for that time, right? So
Yep.
there's got to be boundaries, clear expectations and boundaries set about what the working hours should be and how employees should correctly record those hours.
I'm going to add on to that. I love that point. I'm going to add on to it for non-exempt employees. Oftentimes for non-exempt employees, it's a little mushy about work hours and not work hours when folks are working out of their homes on those days. It is, if that's fine with the employer, it's fine with me. But it is okay if you're an employer who says, but we really need you 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, or whatever it is. Those are the hours that most other people are working. And in this fluid environment, some people are in the office. And when they are in the office, those are the hours they're there. So we need you available and 100% present during those hours. We can't call you during those hours and you're, all over the place, or you're in your car, we really need you sitting down somewhere where you can focus, jump on a video call, et cetera, between certain hours. You can say that to exempt workers. I've gotten that question many times.
Many times.
Yes.
Many times.
But I'm going to work tonight instead.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But that's not when everyone else is working, right? We can't collaborate with you
And
then.
just to latch on to that, yes, yes, yes to that. And even if we have been maybe more forgiving during a pandemic, because everyone's hair was on fire and people were trying to manage lots of things,
Yep.
we can now take a step back and say, time out. If people are still going to be working outside of the office all day long, here's what it needs to look like. Here are our expectations of what your situation is. This is not work, quote unquote, work when available, but otherwise you're going to be doing lots of other things, running errands, helping with school activities.
Taking care of the kids who had no school to go to during
Exactly,
the beginning of the
taking the pets to the vet, right? This is not a do your errands today
right.
opportunity. This is you are working just like you would be if you were in the office, except you're at a different location.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, what else would you like to see in a policy?
Okay, we talked about it. Again, we talked about this in detail, so I'm not going to go into detail on it.
Yep.
But a couple of other things. Workplace safety expectations.
Oh, yes,
right?
that makes people's
You
head
didn't like
explode,
that one.
by the way. I didn't like it. I don't like it now. I don't know what's going on in your house. I don't know if there's broken glass all over your floor.
It's not.
And I don't want to be responsible.
You don't want to know what's going on in my house. 3 teenagers, 4 pets. I'll just leave it at that.
Right.
In reporting of workplace injuries.
That's
right?
that's
These are the
reasonable.
types of
Right.
things that we need to have in writing and have those expectations set. And then the other big one is equipment.
Yes. And that can be state by state, back to our earlier conversation,
Yes.
right? Rules can be different, but who has to pay for what, depending on where the employee is actually located.
That's exactly right. So if this is a fluid workplace and you are allowing employees to do some work from home, there are some states that require an employer to pay for or reimburse employees for equipment and other things that they need in order to do that.
Another reason to know where your employees are.
Yes, that's
One word.
exactly right.
All right, let's finish up with one more, and this is a great one that every HR person knows is an issue for fluid employees or remote employees, and that's the use of PTO.
Yes.
We saw a year or two where no one was using PTO, right? And it wasn't just because there was nowhere to go. People were. It's because people know,
Right.
everyone knew, no one knew if they were actually there or not, or working or not, so they didn't mark off PTO, right?
Sure.
Like they used to. So we need clear expectations about if you are going to be off, if you are too sick to work, if you need a half a day to go on a field trip, et cetera, right? Those are PTO hours, and you need to record those.
Oh, good point. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We've got a lot of PTO banks,
Yes.
don't we?
Yes. Okay, so big picture for HR folks, if you are in an organization where you have stumbled into a fluid workplace, that's okay.
Tripped and fell into the pond.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's okay. That's okay. But we would encourage you to take the steps that we talked about today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.